There's a strange moment in your 30s that nobody warns you about. Not the heartbreak, not the failures. Those are predictable. I'm talking about the moment when success becomes the thing that quietly destroys you. Not failure, not chaos. Success. Because what happens when you hit a milestone too early? You don't celebrate, you panic, because suddenly there's no map, no next step, no external voice telling you who to be. And without that, your mind does something unexpected. It shuts down. You stop feeling hunger, you stop feeling fire, you stop feeling yourself. It's not burnout, it's not laziness. It's identity collapse, a collapse disguised as stability, a collapse that nobody sees because on the surface you look fine, a collapse that feels less like falling apart and more like slowly dissolving into a life that doesn't feel like yours. And here's the part you've never admitted out loud. You're not afraid of failing in your 30s. You're afraid of discovering that the person who succeeded in your 30s was never really you. If that sentence made your chest tighten, don't run. It's not a threat. It's the doorway. Because what comes next isn't decline. It's reconstruction. Stay. You're closer to rediscovering yourself than you think. You don't lose your drive in your late 20s. You lose the version of yourself that was built to please everyone else. And when that version finally collapses, it feels like you've peaked, when in reality, it's the first quiet moment your mind has ever had to ask, what do I want? Most people panic when this happens. They call it burnout, laziness, lack of discipline, lack of ambition. But the truth is more uncomfortable. The identity that carried you through your early years was never truly yours. It was the mask you wore to survive, shaped by expectations, fear of disappointing others, and the silent belief that your worth had to be proven, not lived. And here's the paradox the world never warns you about. When the mask breaks, the motivation attached to it dies too. Not because you're weak, but because motivation cannot survive without identity. Your 20s run on borrowed fuel, teachers, parents, deadlines, comparisons, pressure, praise. You chase grades, careers, relationships, approval. You run fast because the world is pushing you from behind. But the push stops, and for the first time, you have to pull yourself forward. That transition, from external pressure to internal direction, is where most people get lost. Not because they peaked, but because they never learned how to hear their own voice beneath the noise. So this video is not about restarting your ambition, it's about understanding why it disappeared. It's about the psychology behind identity collapse, the neuroscience of motivation, and the quiet reconstruction of a self that can actually carry you into your 30s, with clarity, autonomy, and a sense of direction that is finally yours. Your life didn't peak early, it simply paused, waiting for you to arrive. There's a moment in your late 20s when your mind stops cooperating with the life you've been forcing it to live. You try to work the way you used to. You try to care the way you once did. You try to summon the old fire, the intensity that carried you through exams, jobs, relationships, expectations. But the ignition doesn't respond anymore. And instead of understanding this as a psychological transition, you interpret it as a personal failure. The truth is far less dramatic and far more intimate. Your mind is withdrawing its energy from a self that no longer represents you. When you were younger, your identity didn't need to be defined. You just had to perform. Approval, structure, routines, and the constant pressure of the world acted as scaffolding. You didn't need to know who you were because the environment told you exactly what to do next. But scaffolding is temporary by design. The mind removes it when it believes you're ready to build yourself, and that removal feels like collapse. So you panic. You call yourself unmotivated, undisciplined, behind. You assume you've lost something precious. But what actually happened is that your brain stopped rewarding you for following instructions that no longer align with who you're becoming. This isn't failure. It's the neurological beginning of autonomy. Motivation shifts its source with age. Externally driven effort stops working because the brain matures into wanting self-authorship. It refuses to spend energy on identities built from imitation. That's why you feel lost. Not because you peaked, but because you reached the developmental point where external fuel expires. And internal fuel hasn't been built yet. This emptiness isn't the end of anything. It's the first doorway into an identity that is finally yours to construct, not inherited. The most confusing part of this transition is realizing that nothing bad actually happened. Your job didn't suddenly become worse. Your friends didn't change overnight. Your routine didn't collapse. What changed was you, quietly, invisibly, neurologically, and your life, the one you once fit into so naturally, no longer matches the person your mind is trying to form. Think of it like wearing clothes that used to fit perfectly. One day, without warning, they don't. Nothing ripped, nothing shrank. You just outgrew them without noticing. Your identity works the same way. In your early 20s, you could pour yourself into structures that weren't truly yours. You could chase goals that were expected, not chosen. You could survive off borrowed direction because your brain was still building the circuits that define self. That's why you felt productive, driven, certain, even when the life you were living had nothing to do with who you were. But the brain isn't static, and around your late 20s, something fundamental shifts. It stops rewarding compliance. This is where most people panic. They assume the loss of drive means decline. But it's actually the moment your mind stops allowing you to live on autopilot. It refuses to power a life built from obligation. So the things you used to push through, they start pushing back. You feel resistance in places that once felt effortless. You second-guess habits that once defined you. You wake up with a quiet suspicion that the life you're living is too small for the person you're becoming. This discomfort isn't dysfunction, it's intelligence. Your brain is telling you the truth you've avoided. The version of you that succeeded before was temporary, a bridge, not a home. And now the real construction has to begin. There's a moment, subtle, almost forgettable, when you realize something terrifying. You're still doing everything right, but it no longer feels right. This is the point where most people begin to crumble internally while looking perfectly fine on the outside. A silent crisis, a private collapse. And you don't even have the language to describe it. You wake up and your life looks exactly the same. Same routine, same expectations, same version of you that everyone recognizes. But inside, there's a flicker of dissonance you can't shake. A sense that you're playing a role you've quietly aged out of. And every day you continue performing it, your chest feels tighter, your thoughts feel louder, and your presence feels thinner. This is where the identity crisis begins. Not with drama, but with a whisper. I don't know if this life belongs to me anymore. But you bury it, because admitting it would mean confronting everything you've spent years building. The job you fought for, the degree you sacrificed for, the relationships built on versions of you that no longer exist. You feel trapped between gratitude and suffocation, between stability and truth. Most people never talk about this part. They show the breakdown only after the breakthrough. Not the months of pretending, not the nights of staring at ceilings, not the quiet panic at the thought that maybe you've been living efficiently, but not authentically. And here's the brutal part. This crisis doesn't mean your life failed. It means your old identity expired. It served its purpose, and now your mind is trying to outgrow it, but your life hasn't caught up. The discomfort isn't a warning sign of collapse. It's the announcement of a beginning. Here's the part almost no one understands. Your motivation didn't disappear because you got weaker. It disappeared because it was never yours to begin with. For most of your life, you were running on a fuel source that eventually burns out. External structure, the expectations of teachers, parents, managers, partners, the invisible pressure to be impressive, reliable, or on track. And for a while, it works. It pushes you through exams, deadlines, promotions, and responsibilities. You mistake that pressure for passion. You mistake that urgency for purpose. But eventually, something shifts. Not suddenly, but quietly. The world stops telling you exactly what to do next, and your internal engine is forced to turn on. But it doesn't, because it was never built. And that's when you feel it, the heavy disorientation, the slow mornings, the absence of urgency, the guilt that tastes like failure, the strange sensation of being awake but not alive. People around you still push forward, still grind, still talk about goals with fire in their eyes, and you're left wondering why your fire feels like damp ash. But here's the truth. No one says out loud, your lost motivation is not a malfunction, it's a message, a psychological pivot, a demand from your brain to stop performing and start choosing. The old system, impress, comply, achieve, collapses because it's supposed to. Because if it didn't collapse, you'd never discover what truly drives you from the inside out. And here's the micro hook hiding in this truth. Your motivation didn't die. It's waiting for permission to be rebuilt, from the ground up, this time with your name on it. This isn't the end of your drive. It's the first time you're being asked to create one. There's a moment in your late 20s or early 30s when life becomes strangely quiet. Nothing is on fire, nothing is collapsing, but something inside feels off. You wake up, go to work, talk to people, answer messages, laugh when appropriate, and yet every movement feels slightly detached, like you're watching your life from 2 inches outside of your body. This is the crisis no one warns you about, because it doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like functioning. It looks like stability. It looks like you're doing fine. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. Loud crises force you to act. Silent ones let you drown slowly. Psychologists call this a noiseless collapse. The moment when your internal identity no longer matches the external life you built. You're not failing. You're not behind. You're not lazy. You're misaligned. And alignment is not something you can fake for long. Here's the part people never admit out loud. Most of your 20s were spent performing a version of yourself that other people approved of. Now the performance is cracking, the mask is slipping, and your mind is begging you to stop holding it together. But instead of listening, you tighten your grip, you force the smile, you keep up the routine, you tell yourself, I should be grateful. While a quiet dread grows beneath your ribs, a dread that whispers, is this really it? Here's the hidden truth. This crisis is not the end of you. It's the beginning of your real life. Because a noiseless collapse is still a collapse, and collapses create openings, space, air, a chance to rebuild something that finally fits the person you are becoming. This isn't you breaking. This is you being rewritten from the inside out. There comes a point when the fuel that carried you through your teens and 20s simply stops working. The pressure to impress, to outperform, to prove yourself, the constant need for validation suddenly loses its power. And because no one teaches you what comes next, you assume the worst. I'm broken. I lost my ambition. Something is wrong with me. But nothing is wrong. Something is shifting. External motivation was never meant to last forever. It works beautifully when you're young, because the world hands you ready-made goals. Study for this, apply for that, get approved here. Every step came with a gold star attached. You didn't have to know yourself, you just had to follow instructions. Now the instructions are gone, and your old fuel can't carry you anymore. This is why you feel tired in ways sleep can't fix. Why you drift through tasks as if someone turned down your internal volume, why you look at the person you used to be and think, where did that version of me go? They didn't disappear, they simply served their purpose. Here's the truth most people discover too late. Motivation doesn't die, it changes shape. What dies is the version of you that depended on praise, pressure, and fear to keep moving. What emerges is a quieter drive. One that comes from identity, not performance. But identity doesn't scream, it whispers. And if your life is loud with obligations, distractions, and expectations, you will never hear it. That's why people in their late 20s and early 30s feel lost. The old engine died and the new one hasn't started yet. This in-between place isn't failure, it's calibration. A necessary pause before the next ascent. You're not unmotivated, you're becoming self-directed for the first time. There's a kind of crisis people don't talk about. No dramatic breakdown, no collapse anyone can point to. Just a quiet pressure building inside your chest, like a room slowly filling with water. You still go to work, you still answer messages, you still smile in photos, but something behind your eyes is slipping. You know this feeling. Your life looks fine, but you don't feel fine. This is the identity crisis that never announces itself. The one that doesn't explode, it erodes. It erases you slowly, like a tide pulling sand from under your feet while you pretend everything is stable. Nobody sees it happening. Sometimes you don't even see it happening. You look around and think, why isn't this enough? Why do the things that should make me proud feel strangely hollow? You try to blame stress, burnout, or lack of discipline, but deep down, the truth is simpler. You've been living from the outside in. Your personality became a collage of expectations, fragments borrowed from parents, teachers, partners, society. You became the reliable one, the smart one, the responsible one, the one who holds everything together. Pieces of a self that served you once but can't sustain a future. And here's the unsettling part. When you don't know who you are, life still happens. You still make choices. You still move forward. But every step feels like walking with someone else's legs. You're present, but not anchored. Functional, but not fulfilled. This crisis is silent because it doesn't ruin your life. It drains it. It replaces passion with autopilot, direction with obligation, identity with roles. But the moment you recognize it for what it is, something shifts. Silence becomes awareness, and awareness becomes the first doorway back to yourself. There comes a moment, quiet, private, inconvenient, when the mask you've been wearing begins to slip. Not because you want it to, but because it's become too heavy to hold. You feel it in small, almost embarrassing ways. You forget what you were saying mid-sentence. You hesitate before answering simple questions. Someone asks, "How are you?" And your mind goes blank because you don't know which version of yourself they expect. This is the fatigue of pretending, not pretending to be happy, pretending to be defined. You've built a life on roles that once made sense, but now feel like costumes you've outgrown. You keep performing them because you fear what might happen if you stop. Who will you be without the hard-working one? The gifted one, the stable one, the one who had potential? You don't know, and that uncertainty feels like standing on a frozen lake, listening for cracks. But here's the truth no one warns you about. The mask doesn't just hide you from the world, it hides you from yourself. And when the mask becomes too heavy, your mind starts to protest in subtle ways. Boredom becomes sharper, exhaustion arrives earlier. Even good moments feel strangely distant, like you're living behind glass. People around you don't notice the fracture because the performance still looks convincing. But inside, the stitching is coming undone. You're not breaking down, you're breaking character. And that shift, terrifying as it feels, is not failure. It's the mind refusing to carry an identity that no longer fits. It's your internal truth pushing through the cracks in the performance, whispering, "I can't keep being someone I'm not." The weight you feel is not weakness. It's the cost of pretending. And the moment you stop paying it, the real work, the real freedom, finally begins. There is a question that sits in the back of your mind, one you've avoided for years, not because it's difficult, but because it's honest. It lives beneath your routines, beneath your ambition, beneath the identity you've been rehearsing. It emerges only in moments of stillness, when your guard is down, when you're too tired to keep lying to yourself. The question is simple. If no one expected anything from me, who would I be? Most people never answer it. They drown it in productivity, hide it behind goals, bury it under expectations inherited from childhood. But the moment you ask it, truly ask it, something inside begins to shift. Because this question doesn't point outward, it points back toward the self you abandoned somewhere along the way. For the first time, you notice the gap between your life and your truth. Not a dramatic collapse, a quiet misalignment, a half-second lag between your decisions and your desires. This is where real identity begins, in the discomfort of recognizing that your life may be efficient, functional, even respectable, yet completely disconnected from who you are becoming. And that dissonance isn't failure, it's data. It's your mind telling you the version of you that everyone else applauds is no longer sustainable. You start noticing subtle rebellions within yourself, a hesitation before saying yes, a strange relief when plans get cancelled, a curiosity about paths you once dismissed. These aren't symptoms of laziness, they are signs of awakening. The self you silenced is beginning to speak again. The first honest question doesn't give answers. It opens doors you've been afraid to touch. It reveals the life you built out of obligation and the life quietly waiting beneath it. Identity doesn't start with direction. It starts with permission. The permission to ask what you truly want. There comes a moment, subtle, almost weightless, when the world's voice grows quieter than your own. Not because life becomes easier, and not because expectations vanish, but because something inside you finally refuses to outsource your identity. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "What feels true?" The shift is microscopic on the outside, but internally it's seismic. It's the moment you realize you've spent years contorting yourself into shapes that look stable but feel borrowed. This is where the reconstruction begins. Not with motivation, not with passion, but with sovereignty. You begin to reclaim the small territories of your life that you surrendered without noticing. Your time, your preferences, your boundaries, your pace. The world doesn't applaud this. In fact, it often resists. People who benefited from your compliance will feel the change before you do. They'll say you're distant, distracted, different, and for once, they'll be right. When the world stops defining you, silence becomes a teacher instead of a threat. You learn to sit with decisions long enough to hear whether they resonate or merely impress. You learn that peace isn't passive, it's deliberate. And you learn that identity isn't discovered through achievement, but through attention. Attention to what drains you, what revives you, what aligns with you. Your past selves may grieve this transformation. They were built for survival, not authenticity. Let them go. Their job is done. You're not betraying them. You're fulfilling what they began. This is the threshold. The moment where life stops being something you manage and becomes something you inhabit. You don't need certainty to cross it, only willingness. Because the life that fits you, the real one, has been waiting patiently for you to stop shrinking to survive and finally grow to exist. At some point, the world stops moving around you and you realize the timeline you were racing was never yours. Life isn't a ladder, it's not a competition, it's not a punishment, it's a dialogue between who you were trained to be and who you are finally becoming. And that becoming doesn't arrive with fireworks or certainty. It arrives with a breath you didn't rush, a truth you didn't swallow, a moment you didn't avoid. This is the quiet turning point. Not redemption, not reinvention, recognition. The recognition that your worth was never tied to momentum and your purpose was never hidden. It was simply buried under noise, fear, and borrowed expectations. And the moment you stop outsourcing your identity to the world, you stop living on delay. You enter the moment you're actually in. You return to yourself. No one tells you this, but the transformation you're searching for starts exactly here, in the awareness that life is not asking for a better version of you, just a truer one. So, if this spoke to something buried in you, stay. Minden exists for people like you. The ones who think deeply, feel intensely, and refuse to live on autopilot. The ones rebuilding themselves quietly, courageously. If you want more videos that speak to the parts of you no one sees, subscribe. And if there's someone you care about, someone who's disappearing behind expectations, share this with them. Not as advice, as recognition. You're not behind, you're not late. You're arriving and fully, finally, honestly, and this time you're awake.